From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Sherry. Nice to be back in the Man Cave. Thank you to everyone who's come and said g'day to us in Townsville. Love a bit of run around in Queensland. And there's one topic that people will stop you in the streets to talk about, and it's Chris Bowen's big car ban. Now, as you know, Australians love their utes. They have for a very long time now. They love them to pull their trailers, to go to work, to pick stuff up, to go for a camp, but at the very least, to be in charge of your life. Australians like buying these cars. In fact, last year, the Ford Ranger and the Toyota Hilux, which you can see here, sold twice as many as numbers 3 and 4 on the list, the Isuzu D-Max Ute and the Toyota RAV4. Now, just have a look there. 120,000 cars are either Hiluxes or Ford Rangers. Australians choose to buy big cars because it's a big country with jobs to be done. But because Australia is 1% of global emissions, China is 30%, but we must do everything here to save the planet, such big cars are ruled unacceptable by the class of people who whinge on Twitter, the people who advise governments, or the people who get free cars on the behalf of taxpayers, which is why the People's Republic of Canberra have said no more combustion engines will be sold in our national capital territory after 2035. Now, I'm thinking if somebody wants to buy a ute, they may well just pop over the border to Queanbeyan. They might head up the road to Yass. They may go to Goulburn. So it is going to be available. But the point is, as the ultra-left governments go other governments later when the left get to power. But as we know, one of the ways that the federal government would like to emulate what is happening at the local council, territory level, when it came to the ACT and getting rid of big cars that Australians need to use for work or like to use for home, well, enter the endless stuff-up that is Chris Bowen. Now, fresh from being a federal shadow treasurer and the immigration minister, and I've got plenty to talk to about that in a moment or two's time. Now he's there as the climate change minister. And because that is what the lefties love in the press gallery, or most people on Twitter, he can kind of do no wrong. So when he turns around and says that we're going to change the fuel standards for cars in Australia after 2025, well, what he's really saying is that there will be a limit on the types of big cars you can buy. But because, of course, he's come up with the clever long series of words to make it seem like nothing's being banned, this is what he's saying.
No model will be mandatory, no model will be banned.
But if you keep lowering the amount of emissions that cars are allowed to make, guess what? Eventually, you're only left with one commercial choice, and it's the one that the ACT is going to tell you is the only one you can make 10 years from now. Electric, and that's it. Something that Peter Dutton is noticing and now campaigning on.
Under Anthony Albanese's ute tax and family car tax, families will pay thousands of dollars more for their new Hilux or their new Ranger or their BT50 or their D-Max. And some of those cars, for example, a D-Max, is likely to leave the Australian market.
Now, again, for a lot of people who work in the media, when they hear this conversation about utes and big cars, they think, bogans in the bush. But the reality is, as I showed you before, more than double the next 2 cars are big utes that are sold here in Australia. So people are now starting to realise the penny is dropping, that the spin and the BS that they announce one day has got real details the next. And can I say, stop falling for this trick that lefty governments put out, which is to call things like a ban on big cars the title that the government chooses to put on it. Because while that might be the official title of the bill, remember the mining tax was the resource rent tax? Remember that the carbon tax was a price on carbon? So I don't care what they call them. What we in the real world know them as is a ban on big cars. And this is a big joint where people want to buy them. And now the car industry is noticing that even if you will be able to buy one of these cars and not be able to buy one in a place like the ACT, it's going to cost you a lot of money. In fact, up to $25,000 on top of the existing price of many utes and SUVs. Don't forget, hybrid cars under this government, this summer, they put the luxury car tax on them. Now, Labor has pledged to introduce the fuel efficiency standards for new cars by next year. Remember, that's the ban on big cars, which would increase by about 60% over 5 years. And the government has rejected claims that this will force up the price of any vehicle and argued that motorists will actually save $1,000 a year when it comes to the fuel charges. So despite the fact that the people who are making and selling the cars are telling you the reality of this policy will add to the cost of these cars if they're available at all, and even if you try to save petrol by going to something like a hybrid car, that too will cost more money because the deemed car of the future is exclusively electric. Now, if you want to buy one, good luck to you. I'm a petrol head, you know that, but I don't have a problem with EVs. What I have a problem with is people being told what they can and can't buy when we are 1% of global emissions in terms of a problem. China is 30%. The rest of what used to be called the third world, or if you want to throw in India, that's well and truly almost 2/3 of the world's emissions problems. Oh, but Australia, if we're all buzzing around in electric utes, which don't exist, of course, then everything will be awesome. Well, again, remember this claim about saving $1,000. Catherine King, who was standing by clueless Bowen, making his announcement, she again repeated this rubbish promise.
We know that by 2028 this will save average consumers on each vehicle each year over $1,000.
Now, we've talked about it since they made this announcement, but certainly lots of other people are starting to catch on, and lots of people have been railing against this for the past few days. But I've got to say, when you think about something like a new Land Cruiser, and remember, the number one, number two cars sold in the country right now is the Ford Ranger or the Hilux. These are the cars people want to drive. And my mate Ray Hadley proves why he's in the Hall of Fame, why he's the GOAT. Because he's able to say, well, OK, if you save $1,000 a year when it comes to petrol, but I've had to spend an extra $25,000 to buy it based off today's prices, what does it mean, Ray?
Canavan says, oh, hang on a sec, they'll save $1,000 a year for fuel. But under the analysis they've done, the motoring industry, Ford Ranger, the top-selling car in 2023, would go up for between $11,350 and 18 grand. 18 grand. A Land Cruiser from Toyota, a very popular car, would be penalised between $19,500 and $25,000. So to get your money back, Casanova, you've got to own the Land Cruiser for 25 years to break even. That's to break even, not to make a quid, to break even. You imbecile.
And I share Ray's frustration because Chris Bowen honestly has no idea what he's doing. He knows who he's pandering to, but he has no idea where real people are. Real people in the suburbs that he claims to represent, let alone the regions. People buy SUVs when they're dropping their kids off at private school in teal seats. Sorry, that's just the way it is. And people are driving utes to renovate those houses all over the country, let alone everything else that's required in a big car. Or God forbid, you just want a big car because you've got a big family and they got lots of stuff. Now, to give you an idea again about how Chris Bowen has no idea what he's doing, and you can always tell a politician who doesn't know anything about electric vehicles, is when they pose for photos like this, when you're charging an electric vehicle, holding on to the handle like it's a petrol Bowser. You see, you don't actually have to hold on to it. You don't physically pump anything into it. You plug it in. You don't stand there next to your toaster holding the bit that's connected to the power point. But this idiot, well, it's all about the sizzle and not the steak. But it got me thinking about, OK, how does this bloke, who considers himself to be a bit of a whiz, a bit of a guy who's got a bit of a connection, a bit of a smart thinker, how does he open a scenario where he is openly trying to make it harder for people in his own electorate to buy the cars they want to buy, to travel all around the big city of Sydney or further out if that's what they choose to do with their weekend? Well, it dawned on me. This bloke has not had to own a car for 20 years. You see, he was first elected to the Parliament in 2004. Every member of Parliament, be they a backbencher, a senator, minister or a shadow minister, are given a car paid for by you and I. Now, of course, this idiot ran at one point in time to be the leader of the opposition in 2019. He was hoping to get the spot that Albo ended up getting after the Shorten loss. He decided to take the media back to the fibro house under which his family toiled and worked hard away to say he was one of the common people. This was while he was announcing, his sleeping patterns after losing the 2019 election.
I woke up on Sunday morning devastated. I admit, devastated for myself, devastated for my party, devastated for the country.
Now, this bloke, I tell you what, he's got more tickets on himself than Taylor Swift has ever sold. Now, this guy, fresh from being one of the reasons people didn't vote for Bill Shorten to become the Prime Minister, ran to be the Labor Party leader. Again, come one, come all. He's been thinking about it all the time. He's a politician since he was a local mayor. Oh, you know what I'll do when I'm starting my run for the Prime Ministership? I'll stand in front of the fibro house. I'm a worker. I'm one of those people. Do you know how long his run for the leadership of the Labor Party lasted? 29 hours. Not even 2 days. Not even 2 days. And he pulled out because there was a stitch-up done between the left of Anthony Albanese, which is yes, you can have it now, and the right, which was Jim Chalmers, which is you can have it later. But this clueless political figure thought that he deserved the chance to become the Prime Minister of Australia after being the immigration minister back in the Rudd and Gillard years, when the Australian boat people policy was, if you can get here, you can stay here. He was the bloke in charge that never turned a boat around, that didn't send people to offshore processing, that ended up with 50,000 people coming here and 1,300 people dying as a result of the open doors policy. And then, of course, he showed the hubris of posting this photo with a whole bunch of other, back then, election losers, saying, we're ready to govern. Because there we had the power team. We had bouncing Bill Shorten, we had Penny Wong, we had Tanya Plibersek, Grim Jim was there, and there he was, ready to be the to be the next Treasurer of Australia, was Chris Bowen, who showed the political insights of Malcolm Turnbull calling a double dissolution. Because remember, when his policies, which were all about getting rid of negative gearing, increasing taxes, particularly on people who decided to become self-funded retirees, what was that famous thing that this idiot actually said? Remember, he said, if you don't like the policy, you can vote against it. And guess what people did? They voted against it. So now this guy, who has not had to buy a car for 20 years, is introducing new laws to tell you what car you can buy in 10 years' time. This bloke who claims to be of the working class fibro house, who got it wrong on the borders, who got it wrong on taxes and continues to get it wrong when it comes to the types of vehicles that Australians want or need, but most importantly, to have the choice. Now, I hope that this bloke's days in politics are numbered. Firstly, because, obviously, at one point I hope that this government goes. It deserves to, much sooner rather than later. But also because this bloke has made every wrong decision possible in every job he's ever had in the parliament. Which is why I am fascinated to see that there is a chance he might get booted out at the next election. You see, one of the great threats to the Labor Party isn't just the Greens, who will take some seats off them at the next election, but also its local independent mayors like Di Lee, who took out Christina Keneally, and the local mayor who is thinking seriously about challenging Chris Bowen. Mr Mayor, on the behalf of everyone who wants to buy whatever damn car they want, or anyone who just wants to see the back of Bowen, run, mate, run. Now, we all know the Prime Minister is proven to be, what did I used to call him, each way Albo. That's a polite way of saying that we all know he doesn't tell the truth. We certainly know that when he does make many promises, fingers crossed, behind my back, didn't see it. Oh, OK, where's the fine print? But of course, he tells us his word is his bond.
My word is my bond.
Well, we know that's garbage because despite the fact that however many times they told us no changes to the tax policy that you voted for in 2019, that you voted for in 2022, we're now the government, we've got the media on side, so we'll just break the promise anyway. And as we've told you how many times? The tax cuts in the end work out for the lowest income workers to be $15 a week. Too little, too late. All about saving his political backside. And according to the media, that has now worked. Wait till people actually realise how little the tax cut turns out to be. Remember, anywhere between $15 and maybe $40 a week. That's the best case scenario. Yet if you're paying off a house, you're having to find anywhere between $20,000 and $40,000 extra a year to pay off your house. Well, as you know, the Prime Minister is in Western Australia because one of the areas that will be heavily affected by his decisions when it comes to tax, that will have very strong opinions about what cars they're allowed to buy, is, of course, the great state of Western Australia. Now, there's always this game that goes on each and every year where the Western Australian government says to the federal government, don't take away our GST money, and the local media feeds into it. Perfect example is front page of the West Australian newspaper today, which is, Prime Minister, take the GST vow, you're in Western Australia, you're campaigning in Western Australia, please sign this piece of paper to promise that you will not change the GST. Well, guess what? He's not changing the GST, or at least that's his promise. And as you may have heard by now, the way he decided to make this promise official wasn't to sign the newspaper, but to sign the arm of the newspaper reporter who was representing the West Australian. Now, as Peter Credlin pointed out a bit earlier this evening, little fact for those that want to know, the newspaper reporter, just until last year, was, you guessed it, a Labor Party staffer. So he was, and well, you can see here, a man known to the Prime Minister, at least he was taking selfies with him. He's the one in the blue shirt. Patrick Gorman was the bloke that he worked for. He farewells the now reporter, independent reporter, of course. He's a friend, a terrific staffer and a leader. We have travelled the country advocating for Perth and more recently the Albanese government. So Dylan is now advocating for the Albanese government, but from inside the press corps. Photo after photo after photo. Thank you so much to Patrick Gorman for leaving this up on your Twitter feed. We do appreciate it. And don't you love the absurdity here where the Prime Minister's trying to tell us the other day, oh, I didn't know about the boat arriving in Western Australia because my phone doesn't work while I'm driving. But I just so happened to have a texter here to sign the arm of a former Labor staffer who works for the very paper who is asking me to sign it for you. This is how stupid they think you are. But Prime Minister, if you are signing pledges that you have made, can I suggest one? In fact, I've written it down for you here, which is $275 off power bills. You can sign just there, okay, if you'd like to. So anyone, Prime Minister, if you'd like to sign somebody, would you like to repeat this promise? You know, how like you did during the election, but you haven't said any day after it?
$275, $275, $275, $275, $275, $275, $275.
Maybe on my other arm, I could write that a Labor government will lower the cost of living. Would you sign anyone's arm who had that written? That was a promise you made. But then, of course, petrol. Well, you increased tax on petrol, didn't you? And then when it comes to alcohol, you increased tax on alcohol as well, where 60% of a bottle of rum is now taxation. You're promising to keep cost of living low, but where are interest rates right now? Oh, that's right. They've gone up 13 times since you became the Prime Minister, to the highest rates in a generation. And look, if anyone else would like to write some promises down on their arm that the Prime Minister can sign, well, here's one for you.
More transparency and accountability. And that's the basis of what we will take forward.
Yes, but how does transparency actually look under this government? Sorry, no texters in sight here. You see, they charge people money if you want to have a look at the Prime Minister's diary, and even then, big parts of it are blacked out. There's thousands, literally thousands, of questions that they haven't answered despite saying, we'll get back to you in the Senate. Now, Prime Minister, maybe you want to sign someone's leg because we're kind of running out of skin here, but still, what's another promise that you could sign for us?
I will lead a government that rewards people's hard work and repays their trust.
And when it comes to trust, because we can trust you to always do the right thing, would you sign anyone who expected you to bring trust back when, of course, Katie Gallagher, one of the mean girls, lied to the Senate, which I'm pretty sure is a sackable offence that undermines people's trust in the system? Oh, yeah, and speaking of Katie Gallagher, what was her promise when it came to jobs for the boys, jobs for mates, where the Labor Party would just push qualified people out of the way to give fellow Labor Party people a job?
Ensure that people actually get appointed for what they know, not who they know, which is a bit of a change from the last 10 years. This is really to end the culture of jobs for mates.
Yeah, but then, of course, you wouldn't be willing to sign that one, would you? Because Don Farrell, the Trade Minister, who sits in the very same chamber that Katie Gallagher does, delivering the promise of Anthony Albanese's, well, he decided to give a trade job in the United States not to the woman who was qualified, but to a former Labor senator who was a mate of his. The very definition of what supposedly they weren't going to do. So we saw today about just how dumb the Labor Party think that you are, but sadly at times just how dumb people are in the Australian media. Rather than to say, Prime Minister did a stunt today with a person who has advocated for his government as a former staffer. No, they just run the stunt. As opposed to even turning around and saying later that it was a Labor staffer, it's all ignored. Because you see, when you've got a history on the left, you can sort of bounce between politics and objective reporting on politics. If you're on the right, well, of course, you have no place in the conversation. You're just only in the evil world of opinion. But I repeat, Prime Minister, if you are signing people's bodies, $275 for power bills, all right? I won't get it inked, but just in case you want to pop past and show us how serious you are. But I think by the time I've had that many showers, we both know it's not going to be there by the time 2025 comes around, and you'll break that promise, just like you break so many others. Now, another example about other people's money. Now, unions love the idea of going after the boss and telling the bosses that they have to spend way more money on the things that the unions declare to be important. Now, yeah, in the past this has been about safety, but let's be honest, a lot of this is just about guaranteeing that if you've got a ticket and you're on the job, you're going to make an awful lot of money. Why? Because you've got the protection of the union. And we'll keep you in a good job as long as you keep voting the right way, as long as you keep handing out how to vote cards on election days, as long as you keep blasting your mates that I stand with Dan if you're in Victoria. Well, what about the story in the past couple of days where the people who are the traffic operators, the stop-go, the lollipop people as they used to be called in the past, who are in and around construction sites, are now going to earn maybe $120,000 a year? Labourers and junior stop sign holders working 36-hour weeks on construction sites will soon earn $120,000 a year under a new union pay deal. The deal would mean basic labourers and traffic controllers who operate the stop-go paddle signs would earn more than $2,000 a week over the 3-year agreement and pocket another $260 a week in travel allowance. The $120,000 a year figure is for the basic 36-hour working week. A little bit of overtime, and that's where you end up. Now, this is way above what average people earn, and this is way more than I'm pretty sure many people watching this program have ever earned in any 1 year of their life. Now, I understand the people that are up in the crane or in the really dangerous bits, but $120,000? Mate, just double checking, can I let this bloke through? $120,000? No wonder construction is as expensive as it is in this country. And we start to see that on smaller building sites as well, maybe the union movement hasn't been involved, we are seeing just how expensive things are and just how hard it is at the moment for many people to be able to pay their invoices on time. If they don't pay them on time, then they start to get cut off and the whole system starts to fall over. Meantime, the number of new homes that are currently being built in the most populous state in the country, New South Wales, is starting to fall. Why? Because it's expensive. In fact, the cost of building townhouses and apartments has gone up by $60,000. Geez, I wonder why. Can you imagine if it's $60,000 for a home? Imagine how much big things are, where the union's telling you that the stop-go lady has to have $100,000. Now, again, thank you to everyone who came to the show last night in Townsville. Thank you to everyone who watched it as well. We love the Our Town shows. We'll be doing them every single month this year. And one thing that we love being able to do is not just do the show, but obviously spend some time. And certainly I love spending time in Queensland because you get to know what people care about. And particularly in places like Townsville, they care about youth crime. Now, it doesn't matter whether these are people who are hardcore LNP voters, future LNP voters, people who voted Katter, One Nation, or even people that are willing to say, I voted Labor in the past, but I'm not doing it again. You see, crime is a huge problem in Queensland. And in fact, today a poll has come out saying in particular what we have always known, which is that this is going to move votes at the upcoming election. With old giggles Stephen Miles. 66% of people believe the current Labor government has been too soft on youth crime. And as you can see, 18 plus 26% of people across the entire state, well, they believe that they don't feel safe at home or in the community. In southeast Queensland, it's the best part of, again, just under 50%, and in regional areas it's well and truly over 50%. As you can see there, 56% of people who live in regional Queensland say they don't feel safe in their community. The bloke who expects to be able to whistle past your bad feelings is the bloke who giggles when he gets asked about crime at press clubs. Oh, but he definitely didn't do it, we were told by everyone who pretends we didn't see the footage. But here's the deal. In places like Townsville, 3 of the 4 local state MPs are Labor. Now, I get it, there's lots of union people there and there's some welfare recipients as well as old school workers. But for goodness sake, you're not going to get a different result unless you vote differently at the upcoming election. This government has been around for too long and thinks that it can slime and spin its way out of anything. When you are not safe in your home, what does it take to motivate the majority of Queenslanders to change their vote and to change the government? Well, fingers crossed that does happen. I know we got our hopes up last time, but I hope it definitely happens this time in October towards the end of this year. And just finally, I want to talk about a phenomena. And it's the way that lefties are able to pretend that your concerns don't matter, because the people who agree with your concerns are the people that nobody would want to be associated with. It's a process called othering. Let me explain. Remember a couple of weeks ago when people turned up at Parliament House to protest against what is happening in their communities with the thousands and thousands, millions rather, of solar panels that need to be put across the country or wind farms that need to be put around the country. Now, as I told you, the press gallery was not interested in this particular protest because it was counter to the narrative that renewables are awesome and apparently they will just magically pop up out of the earth. But the reality is they have to be put somewhere, and the people who live where the things need to be put, well, a lot of them don't like it. So they decided to fire up. But they haven't just fired up in Canberra, they've been firing up at local levels. We've told you about the things around Ballarat and the power lines that are planned for that area. We've told you about how the Victorian government has stopped people's ability to be able to campaign against these things. Well, sensing that this is starting to catch on, because it should be, The Guardian, the Turnbull Times as I like to call it, wrote this in the past couple of days. First lockdown, then The Voice, now renewables. Anti-government groups find new energy in environment battles. So apparently the very people who have a problem with these renewable projects, they're the same people who spread misinformation about The Voice, or the same nutters that wanted to leave their house during the lockdown. This is the process of othering. This is when you pretend that this movement or the thing that the powerful disagree with is so toxic, so weird, so creepy, that if you agree with it, well, you will be thrown in with all of the other nutters. Now, this has happened for a long time to lots of different groups, and particularly lots of other groups that The Guardian previously would have championed, the minorities that they would have championed. But of course, this is a minority that they don't want to champion. So instead, the very term they have used to explain how previously the powerless have been stomped on by the powerful is exactly what they use when they are the powerful and the powerless deserve to be stomped on because they don't want regional Australia turned into a giant dumping ground for the things that rich people in the city wouldn't even put in their backyard, let alone their doggy park. Quick break, back with more. We'll be discussing this and a whole lot more. Will Nicholas Reece sign my pledge? Please, it's here, it's ready. $275. Will he sign it? We'll find out, or maybe it'll be Matt Canavan. More in a second here on Paul Murray Live. Thanks for watching. Well, I'm sure that Matt Canavan will well and truly sign any part that he'd like of your body. Feel free, just turn up and see what happens. Double check with his missus first, but still. You can see him as, of course, the Senator from Queensland. And Nicholas Reece, he'll be there at Council if you'd like to get any pledges signed, as well as the Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne. Honestly, Nicholas, you've been around the game for a while. But when the former Labor staffer becomes the reporter, you couldn't hope for a better plant. I mean, his mobile phone didn't work when the boats were arriving in Western Australia, but, oh, here's a texter I had, just conveniently. Would you please present your arm to me?
Oh, come on, Paul. You know, political journalists and politicians sort of move around across the media into political offices. I don't think there's anything untoward about that.
I'm just not entirely sure that somebody who had been previously described as advocating for a certain government should be reporting on said government, let alone providing them moments like this. But of course, if it was, it was anyone to do with, this company, we know there'd be, calls for a royal commission. But when it's, of course, the Labor Party, it's just business as you were. But, Matt, let's get to this big car ban, all right? Now, the reality is, as we've shown before, when Australians have the choice of what they want to buy, they can buy a Tesla, they can buy a Leaf, but guess what? They're buying Hiluxes and they're buying big utes at a 2-to-1 ratio over the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th place cars. Bowen's out there BSing about trying to pretend that it's all about, oh, no cars will end up being banned. Well, they will, because the manufacturer will be forced into what they can offer you. So it is a ban. So I'm not going to use their terminology. It's his attempt to change the rules about what you can drive. I know this, it's 101, and I'm not using their long definition of things. I'm using what normal people will see this as.
Well, Paul, you're absolutely right, because his own officials, the Minister's own officials last week in Senate estimates, told me that the intent of this scheme is to adjust the cars that manufacturers sell. So that's exact words, adjust the cars that are sold. Now, if you're adjusting the cars that are sold, you're, of course, adjusting the cars that you can buy as well. And you can't buy a car unless a new car, unless someone is selling it to you. And that's exactly what this scheme is all about. These people don't like the fact that Australians like to buy utes, and for other large vehicles, they get a little bit sick about that. That's a cultural thing, I think, ultimately, and they're quite happy to see people, Australians, who have those choices punished through this scheme. I've done my own sums, like the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries. I did those in Senate estimates last week. It's not that hard to do, and there's these changes going to have thousands of dollars of impact. The government keeps pointing to the United States, but in the US in the last 5 years, they've only cut their emission limits by 25%. We are planning to do 60% in the next 5 years, more than double what the US has done. The fines for contravening the limits in the US are a third, or have been a third, I should say, of what the government plans to do in the next 5 years. And so their US comparison is completely bunk. We're now being told by the same guy who said he'd cut your power bills by $275 that putting a new tax on cars will actually lower their prices. I mean, if you believe that, there's a few bridges I think I've got to sell you around the country as well.
I mean, Nicholas, I always love this selective use of, because it happens overseas, it should happen here. Well, okay, the company tax rate in Singapore is what? You know, therefore it should happen here. The electric chair is available to certain criminals in certain parts of the country, so it should come here. No, let's talk about Australian policy, Australian conditions, and the island continent that we live in. Again, despite my annoyance at this, at how he's coming about this, if you want to buy an EV, good luck to you. At some point in my life, will I own an EV? Probably. But if Australians are making choices, they're making choices to buy big cars now, but also, Nicholas, you would know that the difference between a Ford Ranger that you buy today versus some clapped-out car that's still being registered that's 10 or 15 or 20 years old, that the real problem is the used car fleet, but the politics is that you wouldn't dare go after the emission standards of the used car fleet.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's a lot to unpack here, starting with that horrible beat-up by Matt Canavan and the Daily Telegraph. Now, at least in the case of the Daily Telegraph, we all know they've got newspapers.
Where's the modelling? Release the modelling.
They've got newspapers they've got to sell. So if the editor of the Daily Telly pulls out the beat-up stick, well, you know that's about the business. Whereas Matt there, I mean, he's just willingly misleading people. I mean, just look at some of the figures that are being bandied around. It's not a proper analysis.
So why is it wrong?
They're talking about the assumptions that go into the figures that were published in the Daily Telegraph today. Assume it's the 2023 model using the same powertrain and the 2023 vehicle with no improvements, extrapolated out to somewhere around 2030. Now, we all know the vehicles are going to improve between now and then, so it's a total misrepresentation of what's actually going to happen in the Australian automotive market. The second thing, of course, is that all that's happening here is we're moving ourselves in line with the US. Now, we all know that the US is the home of the gas guzzler, but even they have moved ahead of us when it comes to automotive fuel efficiency. And so all we're doing is catching up with the US, one of the world's biggest automakers, and bringing our market in line with them, which ultimately I think will be to the good of Australian consumers. And of course, the final point, which has been completely overlooked, including by you, Paul, that is if your car is more fuel efficient, you actually save money over the life of the use of the car. Whole of life cost, you save a hell of a lot more.
Hang on, as Ray put it beautifully, if it goes up $25,000 and you're going to save $1,000, it's 25 years before it goes level. But Matt, we ran your tweet last night, so I know you know the numbers here. Go over them, right? Which is literally explain.
Go. So I'll pick the most popular car, Nick. These are the actual numbers, Nick. These are just the government's numbers. I'll pick the most popular car. The Ford Ranger last year, it emits 188 grams per kilometre of CO2. The government wants its standard to get down to 77 grams per kilowatt hour by 2029. So a big chunk, a big change, over 100 grams per kilometre. I get you're saying the car will become more efficient. I agree. The government assumes roughly a 1.5% improvement in efficiency each year. You factor that in, you get the Ford Ranger down to 168 grams per kilometre. It's still 90 grams per kilometre over the government's limit. The government's fine is $100 per gram over. And so $100 times 90 is $9,000. There's the sums, Nick. Like it's that simple. It takes a little bit of calculations, but that's where these numbers come from. The government won't release its own modelling. So we've asked for that in the Senate. They're refusing to release it because they're saying it's got to do with cabinet deliberations. If my figures are wrong, Nick, release the modelling. Chris Bowen, release all your modelling and show that my numbers are wrong. I've just walked you through my numbers. Where are they wrong? Tell me where I'm wrong.
Yeah, but Nicholas, Nicholas, this is the point, right?
I'm not in a position to do that sitting in the studio tonight.
So you would agree the government should release the data that proves Matt's wrong, correct?
Exactly.
Oh, look, I'm always for transparency. Like, if you're going to have a proper public policy debate, you should put the figures out there, let them be interrogated, and then let's see where the cards fall. But, I mean, there's some pretty overriding common sense principles here. The first is a more fuel efficient car saves you money because your fuel costs lower. The second thing is the cars are going to get a lot more efficient. The third thing is we're bringing us into line with the US. Now, when you think of the United States, we're not talking about Sweden, we're not talking about France, we're talking about the home of the F100, the home of the Ranger. Like, this is the home of the pickup truck we're talking about here. And if they're going ahead with this stuff, surely we can fall in line with them.
Go for it.
But the US, Nick, the US standards, Nick, are not at 70 grams per kilometre. Sorry, for a vehicle, and we're cutting ours by 60% in the next 5 years, or want to. That's the government's plan. That's the problem. I mean, the juvenile sort of superficial comparison to the US is completely blown out of the water by the fact that we are reducing government's plans to reduce our emissions by double what the US has done in the last 5 years to a much, much lower level. And so you're going to run up against the laws of physics. There's only so much more efficient, of course, that you can make an internal combustion engine. And you're going to therefore have to pay this fine. That will have to be passed on to consumers, thousands of dollars more for an average vehicle, unless you go and buy the EV. That's what the government wants you to do. That's what all of this is about.
Correct. And again, as I said,
I can't wait for the day
I understand what
when
happens in the cities, and I know that yes,
I'll send you my model. I'll send you the model, Nick.
There was at the 12-hour there was an electric truck. Again, I'm not pretending these things don't exist, and at some point they're a better mousetrap for some people. What I can't stand is the guy who has not had to buy a car for 20 years is trying to tell the people watching this program what car they should be allowed to buy. I don't cop it. I don't accept it. This bloke's been wrong on borders, wrong on taxes, and he's wrong on cars. Quick break. Back with more in a moment here, where we will discuss boats. Nicholas will have plenty to say about that. And I want to talk about this othering, because it does matter, about the people who go and protest out the front of Parliament, and the powerful media people in the Parliament come up with a way of trying to write them off as nutters. More in a sec. Here with Matt Canavan, Nicholas Rees. Looking forward to tomorrow night's show. Bronwyn Bishop, Joe Hildebrand will be here. Don't forget, you can always send me an email, paul@skynews.com.au. Matt, I noticed with the Prime Minister just happening to having a texter in Western Australia today, he's also at a place in Western Australia where BHP said that their nickel refinery, they may well end up having to shut the thing, 2,000 jobs disappear. You've noticed a small asterisk in this issue when the Prime Minister says, I'm here to help.
It's a very sad situation, Paul. Already 1,000 nickel miners in Western Australia have lost their jobs. If BHP does proceed with the mothballing of the mine, the smelter, the refinery, that will cause thousands of others, at least 3,000 at BHP, but there'll be others as well who work for mines that feed their smelter and refinery. And of course, then you've got the broader impact on businesses, small businesses. There'll be tens of thousands of jobs lost in Western Australia if this sort of the worst outcome happens. I mean, the key point to make here is that the Australian nickel industry, led by BHP, said, let's go down this green nickel route. We're going to produce a green product because our nickel goes into the batteries for the EVs, going back to those EVs. And all the EV customers, of course, will want to drive a car with Australian green nickel to their next Extinction Rebellion rally. Instead, what's happened is Indonesia also has very significant nickel reserves. Their nickel reserves don't have as high quality content as we do. They take more energy to extract, so it gave us a natural advantage. But they've been, guess what, building coal-fired power stations financed by China. They are undercutting us in the market now because they've got cheaper energy. Producing nickel takes a lot of energy. They've got cheaper energy from coal. They're undercutting us and they're dominating the market. And these jobs are going to be lost. These will be they're the first net zero victims, or first major net zero victims in Australia, where our whole industry will get wiped out because of our green obsession. It's so sad, so unnecessary, and it's an indictment on our corporate and political leaders who have made such a big mistake here, none of whom I'd say will lose their jobs. It'll just be the workers who pay the price, as always.
Now, I could talk about unions, I could talk about boats, I could talk about how Melbourne City Council's doing an Israel-Palestine thing in the next couple of days, but I want to take a couple of minutes because you're big brain guys and you respect the audience to talk sometimes about things from the big view rather than we can argue over the grains of sand, but sometimes let's go back. Now, I want to talk about this concept of othering, okay, which is very simply, when someone who's powerful wants to dismiss the people who have a claim against them, they're nutters, they're crazies, they're mad, they're this, they're that, right? And The Guardian decided to try to suggest that group of people who turned up out the front of Canberra a couple of weeks ago, well, because there was a couple of people who said some stuff during lockdown, or because Craig Kelly turned up, or because this sign said this or this sign said that, then basically the whole group had somehow been infiltrated by a bunch of people in society that the bulk of Australia wouldn't agree with. This is a form of othering. Now, The Guardian itself knows what this purpose is, what this practice is, and Nicholas, I've got to say that why not confront people on the issue rather than turning around and saying the people who are protesting, ignore them because they were a bit nutty on this or they were a bit nutty on that, or more importantly, they were standing next to somebody who was a bit nutty on this or a bit nutty on that?
Well, I mean, look, I actually think all media is guilty of othering. I'm not saying that the Guardian are innocent. I'm just saying that all media are guilty of doing this. And it's one of the, pernicious tricks that gets used in public discourse, where you take a group of people, you give them a label, you then describe them as anyone with that label as a fool, not to be taken seriously, and you dismiss everything they may contribute. You know, the right-wing media attacks lefties all the time, as if, you know, an entire side of politics never contributes a decent idea, and that's not true of the left or the right, it has to be said. But, you know, dismissing an entire segment of the political discourse as lefties is, I think, it's shorthand, it's unfair, it's othering. And it also happens with, you know, boat people as well. Like the right does that, they go, boat people. It's like, well, actually, they're human beings trying to make a better life, themselves escaping a prison. So just boat people, don't take them seriously.
Yeah, I think fighting a single bloke
it's a rhetorical tool that gets used by all sides of politics.
But still.
And it goes to, I think...
Yeah, but Matt, what I love here is that supposedly the smarter and more compassionate amongst us, like those over at The Guardian, they well and truly are willing to use the same tactics that they would cry against when it was somebody having a go at a minority sexual or racial or religious view.
Well, look, I actually agree a lot with Nick. I think it is something that's common in political discourse. So I think it's naive to think we'll somehow remove that completely from how we think as human beings. We do like to categorise and group things. It's an easy way. It's a shorthand. I think as long as we're aware of the limitations of it, it's how we communicate. I just did it with Extinction Rebellion, right, talking there. I mean, that's how, you know, we all do it. I think the difference, though, with what we're seeing with, say, some of the commentary around people who may have expressed concerns about vaccines or may be sceptical about the impacts of climate change, is there are elements of the left in particular here which actually want to silence these voices. So I've got no problem with being criticised. I've got really no issue with being called a right-wing nutjob. Label me however you like. In some respects, it often just builds, you know, a reputation and helps focus on the issues that you're talking about. The issue I've got is trying to silence people. That's the problem. Trying to say they don't have a right to protest or they should be censored online. Their posts should be somehow not seen by others. That's where I have a real concern, and that's a trend, I think, largely coming out of the left. I think I don't know too many right-wing regimes in Western society, at least, that are trying to do that. I mean, it's been done in the past. Right-wing governments have done it in the past, Nick. I'm just saying in Western democracies, I don't know of too many conservative governments doing this, but certainly in the US right now, with the security state, with social media companies, this is happening all the time. And I think this silencing is a bigger issue than simply a few insults, which I think we can all take with some thick skin in a democratic society.
Nick, from the deep end of the pond to the shallow end of the pond, one of the great advantages of being a wonderful dad and perhaps being the Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne is you get to take family members to Taylor Swift. How was it?
One of the best nights of my life, Paul. Sydney, look out. Do whatever you need to do to get along to that concert. It is just amazing. She is just one of the best songwriters I think pop music's ever known. She's an incredible performer, and just the stagecraft and the scale of the stadium show is like nothing I've ever seen. I've been to a lot of rock gigs in my time. I've never been to a stadium gig as good as this.
Well, some people would say the same of the Elimination Chamber coming soon to Perth when it comes to the WWE. So you can get the full extremes of Australian live entertainment at the moment. Thank you very much, Senator, future Senator. We'll see you all again very soon. I'm glad it was beautiful to see that lovely smile on the little lady's face too. All right, quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live, about 4 and a bit minutes away from the late debate. That's our show for tonight. Thank you very much for watching. As I mentioned before, Bronwyn and Joe tomorrow night. Here's the late debate.